All right, Skip,
Good
it's
eve-
all yours.
Thank you, Peggy. Good evening, St. Vincent's Church family, and any friends who have joined us. Welcome to our February 2021 learning and discussion session of We Have a Dream, a world without racism. And I'd like to thank Ray Barr for all the information he gave us. Cut this phone off. And also all that he gave us about Frederick Douglass last month. Also, thanks to all of you for your contributions to last month's opening session on reparations. It's a topic that's so important we continue it tonight. First, however, mindful of how we are guided by the Spirit and there are more than two of us or three of us gathered in the Lord's name in our group. Let us welcome his presence and loving guidance as we open ourselves in prayer. Lord, you are the light that has come into the world so that whoever believes in you need not stay in darkness any longer. Do not allow us to sink back into our own dark pit, Lord, but let your warm, gentle, life-giving light lift us up from our depths. Vincent van Gogh painted you as the sun when he painted the resurrection of Lazarus. In so doing, he wanted to express his own liberation from a dark, imprisoning past. Lord, keep showing us your light and give us the strength to rise and follow you without ever looking back. You are our strength, our refuge, our stronghold. As long as we keep our eyes on you, there is no reason to return to past events, past patterns, past ideas. In your light, all becomes new. Let us be fully yours. Let the church say, Amen.
Amen.
Now, before we continue our topical discussion, we want to make sure we have time at the end of our meeting to cover key proposed legislation and how we can make a significant impact. And therefore, brothers and sisters, we're going to stop about 7:55 tonight and continue to 8:15 with a discussion of bills. So now for up to 5 minutes, it's time to share with one another our Black History focus for this month. As Marylanders, we are blessed to have given our country a disproportionate share of the acknowledged giants in Black history. Tonight's person is another of those, our own Harriet Tubman, who would like to begin a brief sharing session. And we'll accentuate.
And you will have to unmute because I did mute everybody.
If I'll take a chance at it.
Thanks, Jay.
Harriet Tubman, she was born into slavery as Araminta Ross in Dorchester County, Maryland, in March of 1822. Shortly thereafter, she wanted to have a different name, so she chose her mother's name, Harriet. When starting at the age of 5, she was hired out as a nursemaid, a field hand, and a cook. When she was about 12 years old, she reportedly refused to help an overseer punish a fellow slave, and the overseer apparently threw an iron weight that hit her in the head, causing a severe injury, and she suffered seizures throughout the rest of her life.
Mm-hmm.
In 1844, at the age of 22, she married another slave, John Tubman. And in 1849, at the age of 27, having heard of rumors that she was about to be sold, she escaped and made her way to Philadelphia. She was alone because her husband and family and friends refused to go with her. She then moved to Baltimore in December 1850, and shortly thereafter began her career as an abolitionist, political activist, a spy for the Union Army, and a rescuer of slaves.
Mm.
She was responsible for leading more than 300 known slaves and perhaps many others to freedom on the Underground Railroad system of activist and safe houses. She was called a number of different things, one of which was conductor of the Underground Railroad, General Tubman, and Moses of her people. There are two interesting anecdotes about during this time. She was illiterate, and slave hunters knew that she was illiterate. And when the slave hunters came near her, she picked up a book and made believe she was reading, and they ignored her. So she escaped that way.
Mm.
And also when the Underground Railroad, if someone threatened to return to the slave encampment, she threatened to kill them because she was afraid that the safe houses would be um, shown, and the present group would be turned in. So she threatened them to keep their minds on escaping. Um, at some point, she moved to Auburn, New York, with her father and mother. In 1869, she married Nelson Davis, and in 1874, she adopted a baby girl named Gertie. She died at the age of 91 in March of 1913. One quick other point. Currently, President Biden has renewed the effort to get Harriet's portrait on the $20 bill. President Obama had started that cause in April of 2016 with the intention of issuing the bill in 2020. However, the Trump administration postponed the proclamation until 2028, citing worries about counterfeiting. The other interesting fact about that is there was a poll taken to decide who was the woman to be put on the $20 bill, and she was selected, and the second and third and fourth places were Eleanor Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, and a woman named Wilma Mankiller, who was the leader of the Cherokee Nation.
Wow.
That's it.
Jack, that was an awesome summary. Thank you so much. Anyone want to add one or two things in quickly before we move on?
I would just like to say that there apparently is a grove in Wyman Park that's called the Harriet Tubman Grove.
Huh.
I felt was very fascinating. I'm not familiar with Wyman Park,
Me neither.
but
You unmuted?
obviously there's something there.
I think I may have shared with you that there's a little alleyway on the east side of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum. When we had someone coming to give a lecture on Harriet Tubman, and she got out of the cab, she had written Harriet's biography and everything. She saw the name Schlemmer's Alley, and she went, "That's Schlemmer's Alley." And so we all said, "Yeah, that's Schlemmer's Alley." She said, "No, you don't understand." She said, "Harriet, in all likelihood, came up and down this alley frequently, coming from the harbor into Baltimore." So we're so loaded with history in our city.
So
One of the things I read about Harriet, I was just looking at the internet today, is the little girl that she adopted. They think she very likely might be her own daughter. They cited her as being a niece, but there were so many similarities, and they had such a really close relationship that they really thought it might be her own daughter.
Wow.
If you look at pictures of both of them, they really do look quite a bit alike. I looked at two pictures and they're very similar.
And the battle during the Civil War, where it was all Native American troops, except for the general, and Rosa was there, and they saved Jack, did you read about that? I think it was 100 people they saved that day. And I mean, they, 100 people they got that escaped from slavery,
Yeah,
but they set fire to lots of buildings, and it was quite a battle. She didn't get any credit for doing that. She didn't get any money for being in the service because of being a female. She
Hmm.
only got money when, after her second husband died, she got money because she was a widow, but nothing because she fought in the service herself.
Wow.
I also
And she
wanted,
was the leader of it, I mean, more than the general was. I mean, she was in charge.
yeah.
I also wanted to mention, Jack said she had moved to Auburn and that she had died in 1913. She was actually buried with military honors, and she's at the Fort Hill Cemetery.
Wow.
Wow.
Great.
Not that
Unbelievable information.
many years ago, a museum is opened in Cambridge, a pretty large museum. It's really worth visiting. And 2 years ago, they erected a new statue in the Annapolis Capitol to Harriet Tubman.
That's
Oh,
great.
wow.
Yeah, I think the site on the Eastern Shore is now a national museum,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Think so.
Thank you all so much for that. That was fantastic. Boy, I learned a lot I didn't know.
Finally, some noted recognition for people that deserve it.
I would like to see all those women on our money sooner the better. They're fantastic people. In part one of our discussion on reparations, we journeyed from Benjamin Franklin's failed attempt to outlaw slavery through the first Congress to pre-Civil War efforts like those of Gerrit Smith, to the compromised Emancipation Proclamation itself, to the earnest but thwarted plans of the Reconstruction period, like the Freedmen's Bureau, to the despicable practices of the Jim Crow era, culminating in the thousands of lynchings and massacres of budding, economically successful Black communities, to the post-World War II federal government's flagrantly inequitable treatment of Black soldiers, veterans, and residential communities. Peggy, through her thorough research, led us through the repetitious pattern of effort, pushback, and failure on a national. Tonight, after covering some local history, we pick up at a time when the oldest of us, like me, were born and in school, and the rest of us were about to enter the journey. So following Peggy's presentation, we will discuss the obvious question: why were all these attempts failures? Then we will begin to share our thoughts on what it will take to have a successful reparations effort, and what are the components of a successful reparations initiative. Throughout our discussions ahead, we should be free to raise ideas about questions and topics we want our speaker next month, Dr. Brown, to uncover. And with that, Peggy, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Skip. And Jody, if you could share that slide with us, that would be great, please.
Do you see it?
Yes.
We
Okay.
see it. I'm just getting my notes up, sorry.
It's all right.
So our Baltimore history is appalling. And as we cover some of our history, see how often it impacts one of these categories. Just as the first blood of the Civil War was shed in Baltimore on Pratt Street, we were the first to pass a comprehensive racial zoning ordinance in 1910 that was then copied across the nation. Baltimore's systems of education, transportation, and criminal justice were battlegrounds. Morgan College tried to move to Mount Washington and was stopped. Black people that moved into white neighborhoods had property destroyed and were threatened. Mayors upheld that racial segregation was in the real interest of the city. White news, the Baltimore Sun and the News American, demonized Black homeowners as Negro invasion, and the law criminalized them. Black people chose their news from the Afro-American because of fake news in the others. We previously talked about the restrictive covenants and contract buying, but the health department was also influential. They knew that social systems like the lack of alley paving and sewer systems and unsanitary conditions in Black neighborhoods were the cause of higher rates of tuberculosis, which was nearly epidemic in the 1910s. But with the mayor, the health department justified the treatment of quarantine, but the real goal was protecting white property values. And the KKK started a church in Webster, Hartford County in 1924. And hundreds of KKK paraded on Roland Avenue in Hampton in the 1920s and had a presence there through the 1960s. They met in McCann's Hall at Falls Road and 36th Street. In the early 20th century, Bolton Hills Association passed a protective whites-only agreement, and all the churches endorsed it. Racist policies in Baltimore were exported and used across the nation. In the 1930s, the Housing Authority of Baltimore City was the government enforcer of residential racial segregation in the city, and that included public housing. Douglas, McCullough, and Poe were Black, and Perkins and Latrobe were white. Black neighborhoods were uprooted in Pigtown for the B&O Railroad, and also in Gallows Hill for a park that's right across from Mercy Medical Center, and in East Baltimore for Johns Hopkins Medical Institute, and that's just to name a few. And then in 1954, the Supreme Court Brown versus Education decision stating that racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional was resisted in Confederate states till the 1970s. In Arkansas and Mississippi, President Eisenhower federalized the National Guard to assist Black students barred from entering white schools. Disparity of funding continues for schools in white neighborhoods versus Black neighborhoods. Laws kept Black people in red line communities, and violence kept them out of white neighborhoods with better schools and resources. Before the 1960s, the federal government usually enforced the Jim Crow laws. The Department of Defense segregated the military. The Department of Agriculture did nothing to stop land dispossession of Black farmers. The Veterans Administration racially administered the GI Bill. Social Security Administration left out Black people till the 1950s. And the Environmental Protection Agency denied 95% of civil rights claims that Black people filed against polluters. And the Federal Housing Administration segregated housing using restrictive covenants till 1948, and they insured homes in the suburbs. The Department of Transportation put superhighways to the suburbs for easy commutes. So basically affirmative action for white people, displacing Black communities in the path. Companies moved to the suburbs as billions were spent to improve white life. Many of these solidified the spatial racism that we have today. In 1954, Isidore Banks, a World War I veteran, owned more than 1,000 acres of land and helped other Black people with loans. He was lynched. His family fled and his land dispossessed. The message: stay in your place. Black freedom fighters were active in local struggles from the 1940s to 1960s. Black activists such as May Mallory, and locally Walter Percival Carter, Ella Jo Baker, Bayard Rustin, and hundreds of thousands worked to boost Black lives and communities nationally. When Black women spoke out about the rapes and that white men were not tried, it animated the movement, and a young Rosa Parks investigated one of the rapes. Black women pushed for racial and gender justice. Militant Black activists, usually students, entered the Black Power movement. Students of Morgan College, now Morgan State University, from 1947 to 1963 worked to desegregate the Northwood community eateries, one place at a time. In 1964, Baltimore City passed Ordinance 103, prohibiting racial discrimination in employment, public accommodations, education, and health and welfare agencies. It said that those discriminated against would be compensated. There was some progress with the 1974 Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the 1975 Home Mortgage Disclosure Act and the 1977 Community Reinvestment Act to combat redlining. But segregationists always found a way. Baltimore officials continued approving zoning codes that prevented affordable housing in some neighborhoods, like Mount Washington. Port Covington's development in 2016 did not include strong inclusionary language. And banks in Baltimore still redlined communities in 2013. So last month we discussed voter suppression still evidenced in our recent elections. And Robert Kennedy promised federal troops in the early 1960s to protect registrar volunteers, saying that only a military occupation could protect them. But JFK wouldn't send them. Not even white murderers were convicted. Skip, you want to continue?
Thank you, Peg. Legislation and Supreme Court case law laid the groundwork for discriminatory and aggressive policing in 1965 and 1968. Terry versus Ohio in 1968 made it okay to stop and frisk someone without probable cause if they had reasonable suspicion. American apartheid became more subtle. Even someone of Dr. Martin Luther King's stature was spied upon and maligned by the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, as we know. But after MLK was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, Black communities erupted in 750 cities. 7 days later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the 1968 Fair Housing Act. By the 1970s, after the civil rights and Black power movements, Black political demands for freedom and justice were stopped by the white lash. U.S. government's Security Counterintelligence Program, COINTEPRO, began vicious reprisals against Black radical organizations. The FBI's COINTEPRO and local police killed or exiled Black leaders deemed revolutionary. The next blockade was President Nixon's war on drugs. John Ehrlichman said Nixon's White House had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. They associated hippies with marijuana and Black people with heroin and criminalized both. So then there was police repression and mass incarceration. President Clinton's Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 actually added to the system of disparate policing and then militarizing the police. Then we have medical atrocities. 1932 to 1972 in the Tuskegee experiment, Black men with syphilis were left untreated for 40 years to study the progression of the disease. And in the 1990s, Black children 6 to 10 years old in New York were injected with half of the deadly drug fenfluramine, fen-phen, to study genetic origins of violence. Here in Maryland, Johns Hopkins' use and dissemination of Henrietta Lacks's cancer cells for decades without her family's permission is now, of course, well known. I won't go on with the examples of sterilization and denied medical treatment, but then in 2020, COVID hit. We know Black Americans suffer disproportionately from illness and their living conditions. And yet only 5% to 6% of Black Americans have received the vaccine. I don't think anyone here believes that's because 94% are scared of the vaccine.
Yeah.
Peggy.
There were also anti-busing battles in Boston in the 1970s and resistance to deconcentrating public housing in Yonkers in the late 1980s and 90s. Black women fought for welfare rights and housing projects in the 1960s and 70s. Locally, Juanita Jackson Mitchell, the first African-American woman to practice law in Maryland, was a leading civil rights activist on the picket lines and in the courts. Her husband was Clarence Mitchell Jr., after whom our courthouse is named. And he was called the 101st Senator for his strong presence in Washington, lobbying for civil rights. But Black communities face continual waves of white supremacist and racist legislation. The reason Ms. Mitchell said, racism made life a living hell for Blacks in Maryland. Exclusionary zoning laws and resource removal impacted Black neighborhoods. Baltimore closed 89 public schools between 2000 and 2020 as the city's population dropped from nearly 1 million in the 1980s to its current around 630,000. And Jody, you can stop sharing that screen now. Thank you. Physical violence continues now. After President Obama was elected and Black Lives Matter uprisings, hate groups came out of the woodwork. The right-wing Tea Party formed and opposed the Affordable Care Act and President Obama. And I won't spell out the details that we all lived through the mass killings in Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church and the brutal police activity in numerous cities, resulting in injury and death since 2015. Hate crimes escalated after President Trump was elected. And we remember the summer of 2019 when over 30 were killed in 2 days and 3 mass shootings in a week. 54 new Aryan Empire terrorists were arrested in Arkansas for conspiring murder, kidnapping, maiming, and distributing meth. This is our country. We had police violence on Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and then George Floyd. Finally, more people were ready to join the fight against persistent racism. But with all the white lash throughout the years, how can we think that reparations has a chance? Lawsuits won't work for slavery because it was legal, though immoral, until it was abolished. To sue the government, one would have to prove the government didn't enforce the laws. Courts don't have the capacity to enforce any legal mandate for reparations to Black people. So the federal government, Congress, the legislative branch would have to make a national reparations plan. John Conyers of Detroit introduced H.R. 40 and Senate Bill 1083 every year for 25 years just to study the multi-generation effects of slavery and assess the feasibility of reparations. Needless to say, it never went anywhere. Now Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas has taken up the mantle. So there have been recommended conditions that should be met. 1, you must have one ancestor enslaved after the formation of the Republic in the United States. And remember, census data did not include slaves. Another recommendation was you must prove and self-identify as Black for at least 12 years before enactment of a reparations program or the establishment of a commission, whichever comes first. So think of the difficulty involved in meeting both those conditions. So establishing reparation amounts and calculation methods have varied, but based on present value would be trillions of dollars. Methods suggested have included many: calculating unpaid wages to enslaved people, purchase price of human property, promised land, value of what the enslaved produced less food and shelter, benefits to whites because of discrimination, or base it on the wealth gap or share of the national wealth based on the percentage of the population. Many have been discussed. Payment could be lump sum for asset building projects or monthly payments, additional education or startup funds or endowments to Black colleges. The aim is to eliminate the racial wealth gap. And then who would pay for the reparations fund? institutions and organizations that benefited banks, etc., guilty of discriminating, or the Federal Reserve. We need a National Reparations Bureau to maintain a public record, set up financial management curriculum, education curriculum to tell the history and impact of reparations and investigate claims and abuses. How long should it last? But then money is just the tip of the iceberg. What are really needed are changes to all of the systems, laws, policies, and structures embedded with racism, as in those categories we had on the slide.
We can continue, Peggy. We're in good shape time-wise. We're in good shape time-wise.
Right. So the whole point of that discussion of what's been suggested for reparations is change it's not easy. It definitely is not easy. So we can go over some examples, Skip, if you like, of where some reparations were attempted or paid.
Sure.
Any questions or comments first?
Yeah, let's take a break because we got good time. We're doing well.
I just have one question or thought. When South Africa, developed their Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and and I don't know that all that much about it, but how different would HR 40 be from that kind of process?
I don't know, but that's an excellent question for Dr. Brown.
It is. We can capture that. That is an excellent question.
Yeah. And you want to, if you have a particular way you'd like to phrase it, you could put it in the chat.
Okay.
I can capture it.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, and the only thing I really know about was how South Africa took a step. They really, in terms of asking for forgiveness and the genuine apology and and really reconciliation, actually going through reconciliation practice. We've never gone that far with it.
And I just wonder how important that would be in order to really make any kind of progress towards reparations.
That's a great question.
It is.
Let's give it to him.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Anyone?
I want to say.
I remember hearings about 2 years ago, and Coates was one of the people that testified. But I can't remember the other panelists and all that were there.
I think I've been in and out of reparations conversations, either going on around me or that I was involved in since 1968, and I'd always kind of given myself an out on the argument by how difficult it is to imagine how you would do reparations, the mechanisms. And when I read Coates' article, it finally got to me when he says at the end, if that's your only issue, then why aren't you in favor of doing the study?
Exactly.
And it opened me up in a way that I hadn't even been aware. And I know since I read that article when it first came out, I have become hyper conscious to the evidence that I haven't noticed everywhere of how much wealth in the United States from the beginning depended on not just the work of slaves, but the value of slaves. From the fact that South Carolina carried carried the first or second largest amount of revolutionary debt from the war because they could bond it against the value of slaves.
Wow.
To a company like Goldman Sachs that got its start trading in slave loans before it moved out of the South, and over again. So I think that, and I'm aware that I'm a victim of what Baldwin says, that you can't solve every problem that you face, but you can't solve any problem that you don't begin by facing it.
Mm.
And I think the reparations conversation makes us face it, and whether it includes a truth and reconciliation way of raising that up or whatever. I think of my own just consciousness and since reading Coates has changed my perspective on this. It's just my own share.
Absolutely. And as John Conyers said, it was just to study it for 25 years, just to study it. It's mind-boggling. And talking about the wealth, and I know it's the first session we talked about it some, but just think of all the cotton, all the tobacco. I mean, it was all done with enslaved labor. The country would have not been rich. So it's mind-boggling.
And the construction. I think Kathy had her hand up.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be an understanding on a lot of people and an acknowledgement of what was done. People need, and I don't know how that's going to happen. To me, that seems like the first thing, because this is a huge effort we're talking about. And then I was thinking about Nazi Germany, and they've turned around things when you think about that. How did they do that? How did the whole country, they acknowledged what they've done. They acknowledged all the bad things with the concentration camps and everything. And did they do reparations there to Jewish families?
They do.
Yeah, we covered that in one of our sessions. They had it a little easier because theirs was a short period. And so we have 400 years of it. So it's embedded everywhere.
To me, it seems like.
But they also killed 2/3 of the victims.
Mhm.
Yes. Also, I think last week there was a news story on how they're dealing with another uprising,
Resurgence,
of racism. Yeah, resurgence of it.
Yeah, I read that.
And there's another thing though that sort of bothers me in the when Peggy was talking, I think, about the requirements to be eligible for reparations. The concept that a person had to have a direct relative who was enslaved strikes me as absurd.
It is.
Because for not just the practical reasons, but for the reality reasons that the victims of the redlining, most of them don't know whether they had a relative who was a slave or not, but it doesn't really matter. They were all victims of the redlining. They were all victims of the segregated schools. They were all victims of everything that happened.
So the dialogue had to change. Definitely.
Yes.
Right.
In Robert Jones's book, White Too Long, he makes a statement that you can't have reconciliation without reparations. He basically indicated that, and so somehow we got to get the reparations before we can actually have some kind of reconciliation going on.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to hear that re-echoed in Dr. Brown's presentation next month in different words, but the same sort of concept.
Jody, did you want to say something?
It's slightly different. It's not financial type of reparations, but I was just thinking, I teach at a private Catholic school, high school, well, middle school and high school. And we've been doing a lot of work on racism, and we've been doing a lot of work over the last 10 years to try to diversify the student body. And we do a lot of endowment work to try to bring in more students of color, both Hispanic and Black. But I had a workshop yesterday, and one of the Black seniors did a little video for us that we could show to the new teachers. And it was talking about how in the 4 years of his high school, how almost all of the books were written by white men, like a lot of Shakespeare, and that the characters in so many of the books were white. And it just makes me think that there are so many layers to, we saw all of those, education, transportation, but that some of the layers we can actually, once we recognize, can do something about. So like repairing the education. I mean, people have grandchildren or your children are on school committees or something, and just talk about changing the curriculum. The curriculums, I'm sure with most of the schools that most of us went to, were what I would consider white curriculum, you know, particularly in the history and English departments. So it feels like that's something that could be immediately done, you know, just recognizing that that's the case, and we need to change it. And I know our school's working on it. It's a process, but anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
Jody, that's an excellent point. There's a book I read a few years ago by a guy named Takaki, Japanese American, and he shows how all minorities, particularly African Americans, are left out of history, and women have been left out of our history. And his particular history book was trying to tell in an inclusionary way. He would take a chunk of time, 40 years, what happened to the European community, what happened with African Americans, what happened with indigenous people, what happened with Asian Americans who were coming over from the West Coast to work, you know. And so every time he moved a chunk of years, 40 or 50 years, he covered the whole waterfront. Not women so well, unfortunately. But
Right.
but that's the kind of thing we've got to get to, where we really full and
Right.
truthful story.
And the other piece of that a lot of the Blacks have been telling me is that then when in the history courses or whatever, if people do start talking about it, it's all about the heavy, horrible things that have happened. They're not celebrating the Blacks and the wonderful things that Blacks have done. And, you know, I thought that was a really good point that they made also.
American proverb, until the lion has a representative, the hunter will always be the hero.
So we continue to hear and read about what the Episcopal Church is doing. And I can't help but continually come back to, what about the Catholic Church? What is the Catholic Church going to do? I mean, not just talk, not just educate. What are they actually going to fund, promote, expect that their congregations participate with? And so I guess we're St. Vincent de Paul, and I'm just kind of asking, what are we prepared to do, each of us? I mean, we can talk and talk and talk, but at some point we need to figure out what we as individuals within the Catholic Church are going to do ourselves, and what we're going to request from our leadership.
So Sue, we'd like to postpone that until we hear from Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, I don't know, has anybody else read his book?
I'm reading it.
Yeah, so he has a huge plan, and we're going to listen to him next month. And I know there are some things in the Catholic Church that are being discussed with, and I don't know, Skip, have you talked to Sharita lately?
No, not since we last talked.
So anyway, so if we could postpone what we specifically are going to do about the money part of it, and hopefully tonight we'll concentrate on what we can do right now about the legislative pieces of it.
Yeah, Peggy, what I wanted to say though, because Sue, we are headed exactly where you are. Everything we've been doing has been trying to give us enough information so that when we really discuss this, we're discussing it from a bank of lenses and perspectives we've had, and we can really come up with something that maybe for once it won't be something that's attempted, then backlashed, or as Dr. Brown would say, white-lashed, and then fails. So how we ensure that something that, as John says, we do that's either systemic or structural actually gets somewhere.
So could I,
That's exactly
one of the
what we're gonna do.
questions I would have for him is exactly getting to the Episcopal response. What does he think of that?
Mhm.
Because I think at the little that I know, it sounds like they're building a fund of $1 million to fund good community projects. There are tons of nonprofit organizations doing that, including the Catholic Church, frankly. I mean, CCHD is funding grants to really nascent community organizations that are primarily, about anti-poverty. They're mostly in communities of color. So I've been a little, I've been questioning what the Episcopal Church is doing.
Well,
So I would like to know what he thinks of that.
I will
as-
say in his book,
Yeah,
my impression is he's not big on, okay, do this project, give him to this. He wants the community of Black people involved in what their community needs to
good,
improve.
right,
So
okay.
he
Oh, very
wants,
much so, yeah.
But I'd like to know.
yeah, that's a good question.
I'd like to know why not the reparations to families and individuals directly. There have been lots of studies done globally on how people in poverty actually have done much better when they're given money versus you have to participate in this project or program. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about that. I'd also like to know how reparations or any other way, getting to the education point that Jody brought up. The problem is much bigger in that what those kids learn in Boston is very different from what children are learning in Dallas. We don't have a national educational curriculum. And so states can pick and choose what their kids are learning and choose not to have them learn about the real history. So that needs to be fixed. Maybe, in the Catholic Church, is there a way that we put our money and our requests to the larger national effort to say at least all children in Catholic schools should be learning the same history? And how do we make that happen? I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
Just
No, those are very good points, Jerry. And the big pushback with education has always been the so-called lay control and local control education, which means they can control the curriculum. That's how you wind up having places teaching creation theory, as opposed to creation through evolution, that kind of stuff. So it's a big battle. And again, the forces that are there that don't want a really inclusive curriculum, that really want to keep teaching things like, the lost cause and all of that to their myth. I think, frankly, that one reason direct payments have been so difficult for people to get to is whitewash again. You start saying what happens when you talk about affirmative action. It's sort of like, well, they're getting that, where's mine? As if everybody needs something. And so you've got to find a way to parcel out something to everyone to be able to deal with something you want to do for a particular group.
One thing I just wanted to note, like while the systems are the most important and impactful in the long run, I was talking with my roommate yesterday. She's in another one of a group similar to this, and there's been a lot of education happening informally like this, and a lot of the lift has been done by the people of color in the group, whether that's sharing their own experiences, but more than that, sharing experiences and just the education that I didn't learn in school, kind of like you were talking about, Jody. And one person brought up, well, I'm a principal, I'm a superintendent, I work at this school. This was a Black man. And he said, well, I get paid for all of those things. how would people feel about compensating the people of color in this group for the work and the educational and the time and the research they've done just in this group. And it was like a very, very localized, like, would people be willing to put, we're talking like $20, right, in a pot. And suddenly everyone was like, no, we got to figure out like the rules. How is it going to be fair? Like, what if you get too much for not? And it's like, we're talking about a Facebook group. And I think that, like, while figuring out what the country and the church and the states and the cities and all of that owes these communities, it's like, what's that reaction that's right there when it's me and 30 other people, and I'm like worried about my $20. And I just think that it wasn't my experience, it was my roommates, but it really made this be very like, I don't know how long the bigger conversation is going to take, and while we're participating in it, what are we willing to do at a very, very, very local level, and what is that feeling that feels hard about that? And maybe there's something there, I don't know, but the question has never been posed to me in that way.
Yeah.
I think there's something American, something in the American culture, and I've just seen it in so many things, where we as a people would rather deny money to 1,000 deserving people rather than let one undeserving person get a buck. And it's never made sense to me, but it prevails everywhere. The constant looking for welfare fraud, the constant looking for all sorts of fraud that doesn't exist. As a government worker, I had a friend once who said it would be cheaper to allow graft than to do all the things we do to prevent it. But that it's just there. We would rather let 1,000 people get nothing than one person get something that they, quote, don't deserve.
Just like Jesus, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Peggy, this is a fantastic discussion, but you told us that we needed to switch our perspective at 7:55.
You told me that, Skip. I'm just following.
Oh, Peggy.
Who started this? No, Skip and I talked before that we really want to get to the legislative piece. So we're at 7:55. We're going to jump to that if everybody's okay with that. I did capture the questions that were asked, and I'll capture the chat.
I did too.
Later. Okay, great. And I agree with everybody. I mean, it is difficult, but I agree we need to do something, and quickly, Sue, to yours and to Joe's point. So let's talk legislation. So we were going to discuss the reparations attempted and that have already been paid, but we're going to skip that now and go to the legislation, which is imperative if we want to change some of the systems that we have in place. And I apologize to you non-Marylanders because we are going to focus on Maryland legislation. Since the legislature is in session right now, it is critical that we do it now. So after you tell us what bills you researched and that you think are important, we're going to show you how easy it is that you can make it a call, you can make your voice heard, and it's extremely easy. And we'll go over some of those things. But first, what are some of the Maryland bills that you think are important for us to support? Jerry.
I looked up a couple of things today that are before the state Senate and the House now, and I'm sure that you all saw this, but there's House Bill 1260, and that required the Maryland Commission to assess funding for new programs and to modify existing ones in Black colleges in the state. And that was vetoed last term by Hogan, but it was passed both in the House and the Senate. So the thinking is that that veto is going to get overturned this term. Sorry.
So that was last,
Look at the funding.
that was last year's House bill number, correct, Jerry? Yeah.
Sorry.
Quite all right. Are you okay? Take a drink. All right, great, thank you. Also, I think this year House Bill 1 is historical Black college and university funding. So it could be that they just introduced House Bill 1 to make up for the one that was vetoed. So if we're dealing with current bills, we can use the House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1. Anybody else?
I've got one that's may seem trivial, but to me, I think it's important. And I don't have the number for it, but and it's one that almost passed last year, but it's to eliminate Maryland, My Maryland as the state song.
Oh, yes.
It's way past time for that thing to go.
Yeah,
Does anybody know the number? I don't know that number.
I don't know.
I think it's like Senate Bill 60 or something, but I didn't write it down.
Why don't you email me, John, when you.
Okay.
But we're going to tell you what we're going to do with this shortly. Mary Ann, you had your hand raised.
And again, I've been following, is it Standing Up for Racial Justice, Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURJ?
Showing up.
Showing up. And I have been looking at a number of the bills they've put, things like, and I'm sitting here unprepared without numbers, not making people who are in home detention pay for their own imprisonment if they cannot afford it, those kinds of things. But
You talked about the GPS ankle bracelets.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
House Bill 316.
Yeah.
Yes.
And go ahead.
Honestly, something I'm really having a hard time with. And I am hoping that maybe, I don't want to take up this conversation, but if other people have resources that could help me. The bill that wants to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights.
Oh, yes.
There seems to be so much push that absolutely has to be repealed, along with eliminating school resource officers from schools. And I happen to have a very dear friend who is a police officer, pure as the driven snow, in terms of ethics and integrity. And he has had some very compelling arguments as to why repealing those things is not a good idea. And I would just like more talking points or more assistance with that if someone wants to email me.
I can address that actually, because this is critical. It's House Bill 670 and it's returned control of the BCPD to the city is one piece of it. And the Bill of Rights is another. So it's a huge issue. I have a long letter here, 2 pages actually, from the president of the Senate, because I had written in support of it. And he is talking about, I think they're going to piecemeal it, because Surge did send out something saying, please support this. And I support it. And then they came out, another Black organization, I forget which one it was. I don't know if it was Surge. They're saying, we think it should be either be amended or not passed. So I did write Luke Clippinger today, because he's been on Zooms with me about this issue and said, I supported it at first, and then I said, don't support it. I said, I really think that it needs to be looked at. So I'm not sure that one's, I don't know that I could say, yes, everybody supported at this point, or no, don't support it at this point. I agree.
I think it's
the
House Bill
SRO
151.
Yeah, they've piecemealed.
House Bill
now.
151.
151 is for repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, and 670 is the local control of the Baltimore City, back to Baltimore City, which was a huge piece of it. So it was all one bill way back when, and then I think they split it up.
No, they were 2 separate bills, Peggy. The 670, House Bill 670 is the Speaker's bill. Adrian Jones, and it came out of a commission that she set up to study all of the issues around police reform. So it is an omnibus bill. It has a lot of stuff in it, and I listened to the whole hearing the other day from the Judiciary Committee in the House. It has a tremendous amount of support, but the opponents included the ACLU, which got my attention, mostly because they felt like the way that it was written wouldn't really satisfy what the framers of it intended. They did not, in the Judiciary Committee, discuss the return of control to Baltimore City. It was all about the police Bill of Rights. And they had Harrison from the city, Commissioner Harrison, in support of it. They had the sheriff of PG County, who is also the president of the sheriffs throughout the state, in support of it. They both had reservations around some areas, but what particular, Marianne, what your friend's problem is, that, and what the proponents of this bill are trying to reform, are the fact that there is a considerable amount of rights that are given to police officers when they are accused of an action that are over and above what any individual citizen would get. It gives them almost a week and a half before they have to answer. And in that time frame, it's believed that there is a lot of ability for the blue line to coalesce around them and for them to get their story straight. And it sets up an unfortunate situation that when somebody's accused and it's their job and a criminal action, I mean, that you try to be self-protective, and it ends up alienating the community in a way, because there is no transparency that's around it. There is transparency provisions in this bill too. The bill is huge, and it may be that it does get separated out into component parts in order that it can be more palatable and more easily passed. Sorry, Peggy.
No,
just...
thank you, Audrey.
No, thank you.
The president of the Senate, he's saying he supports repealing the LEOBR. But the local piece is the piece that they're arguing about, and that's the House bill. I was combining them because in the letter I had them combined, but you're right, it's two separate ones. And I haven't heard anything negative about the Bill of Rights except from police. So I agree, Audrey, with what you said.
Also, Bill Ferguson, who is the
Senate president.
Speaker, Senate president, right. He's my representative. And in the letter, I'm sure it was a form letter that you got too, Peggy, he said he's concerned about control going back to Baltimore City because he's not sure that Baltimore City is in a position financially to pull it off. But he said if Brandon Scott, if the mayor and the council believe that they can, he will not stand in the way.
Exactly. That's what this letter said. And I mean, I have been on Zooms with him also, and he has seemed pretty supportive. So what about, I mean, I'll tell you what, we're kind of running out of time. There are so many bills. And I'm going to just show you something that Jack Schmidt put together, which spells out a lot of them. And I have a list too. We wanted to do a couple things. First, I wanted to know, is there anybody who would be willing to, knowing how critical this is, who would volunteer to work as just a small group to identify the high priority bills for St. Vincent's? Compose maybe a letter that everybody could sign and send to the representative. And if you like, send a letter and testimony from St. V's. So are there any takers for that would volunteer for that? Jack? Anybody Anybody else?
I'll let you know in a week's time, maybe. I might be.
I will work with Jack.
Sue, great.
I will, Peg.
Joe? Thank you. All right, well, we're gonna now, Audrey, if you want to tell them a little about.
I'm sorry, Liz had her hand up to work with
Oh,
Jack.
I'm sorry, Liz. You're up in my corner there. You're muted. You volunteering?
I've spoken to Jack a little bit about this, so I can work with him also.
Excellent. Thank you all very much, because I mean, this really is important. And while Audrey's going to tell you a little bit about what Surge is, and we're going to just show you how easy it is to make your voice heard. If you don't.
By the way, I put that bill number for the song in the chat.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Okay. Surge is an organization of predominantly white people, and they're organized around racial justice. And they advance policy proposals that are supported by organizations that are led by people of color. So what they have done is there were a number of us who were on their call about a month and a half ago, and they had their POC partners come on the call and talk about what their high priority bill proposals are that legislation that they wanted to push this year. And the beauty, and I think this is what Peggy wants me to mention, is that the beauty is that they are highly organized. And if they have your name and know your district number, they are sending out on a regular basis now bills that are being heard in the legislature. And if you support that bill, you just make one click and they automatically bring up a letter that you can you can add to if you wish, but it's a reasonably good letter in and of itself. And you simply start writing as Peggy's pushing on that button. There's the letter. And these are Luke is the committee chair, and these are Peggy's in 46 with me. So it's Luke and Brooke Learman and Robin Lewis. And the letter automatically goes to them.
And you can add a little statement, which I usually try to add something personal there. And then you just send the letter. And it's that easy. Now, they always will ask you if you want to give money, but of course you don't have to do that piece of it. The other thing is if you haven't done a lot with them, I tried to save one that if you haven't, I tried not to sign some of them so that I could show you what you might have to do. You might have to put your, here we go. You might have to put your name and address in.
Yeah.
But as soon as you do that, you say start writing and you're to the next screen. I mean, it couldn't be easier.
And it takes you right to your own particular legislators.
Yes.
Wow.
I found it extremely easy.
They also, I don't know how I connected to this, Audrey, but they also have a feature because it's hard to track the timing of these bills. So I get emails from them regularly that say, submit testimony now, and it has the date.
Right.
And by 8 o'clock that night, they're following the timing. And it does the same thing as you're talking about, prevents the letter, but it enables you to be right on time with things. I may have had to sign, no, maybe it's because I'm a member. I don't know how that feature got triggered in my email, but I find that very useful.
Well, I think when you sign up with the organization, you can sign up on two levels. You can either be, general letter writing, or you can sign up to give testimony. Testimony is received by the legislature about 48 hours, 2 business days before a bill is being heard.
Peggy, I have the opposite problem with Surge. I just through Jack, got the information about them, and I was very impressed. And I sent out long statements along with each one that I responded to. I guess it was about 10 of them. And almost every one of them, I get a letter back from representatives saying that they're still in committee, and it's nothing you can, don't tell me, you got to tell one of the committee members.
Well,
then you have to go
that's
back and
kind
find
of the advantage of that. As you saw, it went to the committee. It went to the committee who's working on it, which is such a lovely thing. We'll go back to that in just a second, Rita. While I have this up, let me just show you, if anybody doesn't know their district, you just click on members here, find my representatives. You put in your address, say look up. You put in your address and it'll tell you what district you are. And then any single bill you want to research, like House Bill, what's the climate one, 583. So it'll tell you exactly where it is, who sponsored it, where it is, you know, when the second reading, it's a wealth of information. All you need is that one email address. It tells you what the cross Senate bill is, the committees, Environment and Transportation, Economic Matters. I mean, it's really, if you have that email address, not email address, URL, it just makes it so easy. So if you don't already know this and have it automatically come up every time you start to type MG, then write that down is what I would suggest. And that maybe Jody, you could put that in the, or Audrey, you know, by heart, if you could put that in the chat.
I got it.
Anybody. And then any organization you're involved with. Now, yes, you will get flooded. I mean, you know, here's another one on 2-1. And then you will get, I think I deleted most of them today. I was trying to clean up this. But you'll get them too, like if you want to do it for environmental, you'll get them from them. It's easy to make your voice heard as long as you sign up with the right organization. So here, I got this one all at one time. You know, all those different bills that I can just click on and support them if I want, or not support them. So anyway, that's our spiel for. So back to the question. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add, one of the things with the surge legislative agenda for racial injustice is that I haven't seen any bills around housing and eviction. And what I was able to find out is that an equivalent site to the surge site is rentersunited.maryland.org.
Yeah.
And they will, you know, once you register with them, they will send you the same kind of information. And they are currently looking at eviction and right to counsel for people who are being evicted and all those kind of bills statewide. Many of those kind of legislative initiatives are already being looked at by the city council here in Baltimore, but these are statewide initiatives. And, you know, with coronavirus, eviction and adding to the homelessness, which has always been a ministry and advocacy area for us at St. B's, is something we might want to think about too. And that's rentersunited.maryland.org.
Jody, I think you put in the wrong link because maglev is for the train. Okay.
I just looked it up and I skipped the letter. So I just looked it up. I'll fix it. MGA.
LEG. Maryland General Assembly legislative.maryland.gov. So
I just looked it up because.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I do support maglev, but.
Yeah, and actually, Al, it's not off subject. One of my very good friends is working hard to make sure that minority involvement is not absent from the whole maglev initiative, that it doesn't just benefit the majority.
Good.
I mean, the other thing is, you know, the Public Justice Center where Matt Hill is, I mean, they are definitely doing stuff on housing. You know, whether they advise on legislative things, I don't know for sure, but it's definitely worth going to their website.
Yeah, they do. And when he does, oh, not Matt Hill. I'm thinking Chuck Henderson. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Manhasset.
beyond the boundaries too.
Well, and that's what I'm going to show you something else. So I'll show you both Jack's and let me see what date that was. And we're happy to send this out if anybody wants them. But Jack has his for the committee, the group of you that are meeting. So Jack put together this. You can tell how much more detailed he is than I am.
Ooh.
So it has a whole description of the different laws. So you have the right person on this task group.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
And then you talked about beyond the boundaries. So I did quick and dirty for me. So the asterisks are surge, the purple are beyond the boundary, the green are environmental ones. And all these are surge. So if anybody's interested, we're happy to send these out.
Yes, please.
I don't want to send them to everybody if everybody doesn't want it, but you can email me or I can send it to everybody if you think you want it.
People will blow it away if they don't want it.
Yeah, send it to everybody and if they don't want it, they just don't look at it.
Okay, all right, that'll work.
So
So
the one bill that hasn't been talked about is the bill that Bridge has supported, and that is the Juvenile Interrogation Protection Bill.
it's House Bill 315.
Yes, Senate Bill 136.
136. Yeah, they only had one that they were were pushing, so that was interesting.
But they really went full court on it.
Thanks for bringing that up, Audrey, because I was going to ask that question myself, because I know Bridge had something out there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's on the key too. If you get this, if you read the little key, it'll tell you which one bridges are and which one beyond the boundaries are.
Good.
All right. Anything else? It's a lot of stuff right now. Now's the time. So don't be shy. Don't hesitate to sign up for these groups and get your word heard. Sue, you look like you had a question.
No, I would like to make a comment. I just, as a general focus, I think we really need to look at voting rights acts. At a national level, since the election, there have been 28 states that have proposed 106 bills to limit voter rights.
Amen.
So I think one of the most important things we can do for people of color is to make sure that their right to vote continues to be strong and healthy. And although that's at a national level, we can, I'm sure, find.
We have one. House Bill 222 is Value My Vote Act.
Yes, and that's for incarcerated. Is that the one for incarcerated? Yeah, so I think that could be a focus.
Yes.
In my opinion, should be a focus. Anything that has to do with voters' rights.
Yeah, definitely. And what I would suggest that you do is like if you have a list that you use, print it and then do a check mark when you've already notified your representatives, because you'll get the same bills from other people. And, you know, I don't like to send 3 letters about the same bill to Brooke or to Robin or to Luke or whomever. So you might want to keep track of which ones you do that for. So, any other questions or comments? All right, well, hopefully, Dr. Brown, if you think of any questions you have for him, if you would like to email either Skip or me, and we'll be happy to to forward those.
And tell me again exactly who Dr. Brown is or what organization he represents.
He wrote The Black Butterfly, which is the whole book is about, thank you, Skip. I told him he didn't have to take it to where he was going, but he took it anyway. Because he's such a good
Yeah, I'm going bedtime reading.
bedtime reading. I was just going to say that. So it is really a comprehensive plan for how to do a reparations, infusing, and he uses Baltimore since he's from
Yeah.
here, taught at
What's his
Morgan.
first name?
Lawrence.
Lawrence T. Brown.
And he's written a couple of other things, but he has a rather unique approach. And actually, this kind of segues into what we were going to say, Peggy.
Yeah.
He's really done a lot of research and analysis on systemic racism. And his plan for equity really will help us to kind of try to come up with our own way of looking at viable reparations. He has a specific vocabulary. He's coined a lot of terms. For instance, he really believes that space, his notion of space, is very much involved with race. And space to him means land, but it also means the neighborhood. It also means the density of people put in a neighborhood. So when he uses that term space, it's very important. And he says there can be no racial reparations without spatial reparations. And so he gets into the redlining, how the economics plays, resources are kept out of redlined neighborhoods. I mean, it's really involved. I'm enjoying it. So what we're going to do in the next several days, Peggy and I are going to get out to you a short lexicon of the terms that he uses, because he's probably going to use them in his talk. And this way you will understand the term, but you'll also, I think, get a pretty good inkling of where he's coming from and why he feels that, you know, it really almost pulls together all those categories that we had listed coming down the list, but from this lens of how people have been disenfranchised through land, where they live, where they're supposed to live, where they're put out of. Think of Flag House that used to surround St. Vincent's, thousands of people. It was put up 12 stories high. I used to work there when I was a deacon, to bunch people together from wherever they'd been moved before. There's no more Flag House, as you know, because of what's happened, you know, when they tore that down. But wherever those people dispersed to, they didn't go wherever they wanted. They just, you know, so he talks about how people are moved that way. So we think you'll get some really good insights out of all of that.
Skip, the other phrase he used that I thought was so noteworthy was Black lives can't matter until Black neighborhoods matter.
Yep, and you love white lash too. You adopted that.
I adopted that right away.
Instead of backlash. But like there's about 18 terms we'll send you.
Yeah.
Peggy, just an information point. I've been watching the Georgetown webinars, and some of you, I think, have followed this, but on last week, they did Black women in the criminal justice, and I had sent Peggy an up thing about that, but I just would say to you, go back, you can find that. That was absolutely outstanding. And I have to tell you, it brought tears to my eyes to read the kind of discrimination in the criminal justice system against Black women in particular. I mean, as specific as not being given sanitary products and toilet paper as punishment. And the 4 presenters on the webinar from Georgetown are Black women, very educated social workers who have been working in the criminal justice system. So it was last week on February 4th, but it's called Black Women and the Criminal Injustice.
Jerry, I got the recording today, so I imagine either Peggy did or you did. So you can send it out to everybody.
Right. Okay. It's just, I really recommend it. And if you can follow those global Georgetown programs, I mean, every week I go to at least 2 of those webinars, and they're so concrete and informative with John Carr, and then three other people that really are experts in a particular field. But I thought about this all week in reference to this group tonight, that talk about reparations in the here and now, how we have to make up for this abuse in the present time.
Well, Jerry, Surge has for the Out for Justice people, a bill that will look at the veto override for gender pre-release. It's Senate Bill 684. Apparently, the pre-release for women is just horrendous as opposed to the pre-release situation for men in the state of Maryland. And this was trying to correct it.
Yeah, I mean, it's even just women go to jail for shoplifting. Black men don't even go to jail for shoplifting. And they would take these women when they would have education classes, and if they were being punitive against them, they wouldn't give them sanitary products, and they would have to go to class in bloody clothes. And men would be walking around with clean second outfits tied around their neck, but not the women. That's how they and this is current. This isn't 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I mean, it just made me, it really will shake you, but it's just, these women are incredible. And thanks, Audrey, about the Surge. I do get the Surge things, and I've responded to several of them. So once you get on your list, they got you. I missed that though.
It was horrendous. And Georgetown University, if you don't already watch their webinars, they are fantastic, everyone.
They're just amazing. Yeah.
I'd just like to make one comment about your presentation here tonight. Was superb. And Peggy, when you were running through that history, okay, of that whole thing, it's a devastating thing to listen to.
It is.
You know, and heartrending. And that's the type of information that needs to get out to the rest of the damn world, okay, in the United States, so that they even get an inkling, a tiny inkling of what was going on and what is still going on.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for that run through.
Skip
and Skip and
Peggy did
Jack
all
as
that.
well. But I was really touched during your run through, Peg.
It's horrendous. It's mind-boggling.
And she has more. She has a list of all the attempts at reparations that failed. That, you know, we can probably get that out to you so that you'll see it. Peggy, I'm going to have to run downstairs before it's late.
Right.
You have the closing prayer.
Thanks, Skip.
You have the text for the closing prayer?
Yes, thank you. I'll do it.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Skip.
Thanks, Skip.
Thanks, Skip.
Thanks,
You all.
Thanks.
Oh, run, Skip. I didn't see what time it was. Go, go, go.
I am, don't worry.
Sorry.
No problem.
I'll end the meeting. Don't worry about it. I'll end it. Go
Okay.
ahead. All right, see ya. Sorry. He's at a hotel and the restaurant closes at 8:30 and he has to eat before. All right. So anyway, thank you all so much for your participation. For those who volunteered to work on the legislation, truly appreciated. And I'll be in touch, Jack, and we can discuss, how you want to proceed. So our closing prayer tonight will be an adaptation of the simple one President Obama said on his inauguration day, just before he was announced and walked onto the platform erected at the Capitol. He repeated it every night of his presidency, giving thanks, asking for forgiveness, petitioning for his family and the American people, and asking for guidance. So let us pray. Loving God, thank you for all we have been given. Forgive our sins. Keep our families, loved ones, the American people, and all people safe from harm. And guide us through your Spirit as we try to fulfill your loving will. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you all. Ash Wednesday next Wednesday, but next month we go back to the third Wednesday of the month. Okay.
Does that St. Patrick's Day?
I think it is March 17th. Is that okay? So I'll expect everyone in green.
I don't think any of us are going out partying.
Yeah, really, of all years. Otherwise, it might be an empty group. All right, thanks a bunch,
Thank
you
you.
all.
Hey,
Thanks.
Peg.
Bye, everybody.
I'll be
I'll
glad.
stay
Peggy.
on. I'll stay on, Al, if anybody needs to chat.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
What I wanted to
Thank you.
know, Peggy,
Mhm.
is the recording of this resident on St. V's YouTube site or?
No,
Or-
so what happens is I save it to the cloud and then the cloud was getting too filled. And so they were gonna kick us off Zoom, I think St. V's, or they were gonna start charging us or something. So I have moved them to my Gmail. Well, not this one yet, and the last one I have. So one time I know Colleen put the recording link in the e-newsletter. She doesn't always do that, but I can ask her to. And anybody who wants it can email me. I'm gonna put them all on a thumb drive and probably, I don't know, give it to Colleen or something in case somebody wants. But if you need a recording of a month that you're gone or something, just let me know and I'll send it to you.
Peg, why don't you see how many people have Google Drive, Gmail, and you could just share it with everybody that has it.
How many have?
I was thinking of it just in terms of a wider community, not
Yeah.
just for us.
I know,
Okay.
because really, most of you have been on all of them. So it's like, it's in the e-newsletter a week or 2 weeks before, telling people we're discussing anti-racism. And, every meeting we get maybe one new person, but usually it's the same people. So you tell me, I'm open. We have offered it to Sharita in case she wanted to use anything, since she's trying to get a movement going in all the parishes, but I don't think she's asked for it yet.
Well, one of the things I noticed with the mass, okay, is
Oh,
that
you know
you'll
what,
get,
Al, let me stop the recording while we discuss this, okay?
okay.